3 disturbing true traveling horror stories. We travel to escape. We travel to find ourselves, to see the world, and to leave our worries behind. But when you leave the safety of your home, you leave behind your control. Tonight, I bring you 3 stories from travelers who checked into places they should have driven past and met people who were never supposed to exist. Before we begin, look around you. Is your door locked? Good. I'm Mr. Horror Man, and these are 3 disturbing true traveling horror stories. Story 1. The Airbnb in the Pines. Elias was the kind of traveler who found comfort in the fringes. A freelance photographer by trade and a nomad by choice, he had spent the last decade navigating the back roads of the Pacific Northwest. He didn't like hotels. The sterile smell of bleach and the muffled sounds of television through thin walls felt too much like the city life he was trying to escape. He preferred Airbnbs, converted barns, A-frame cabins, and forest retreats where the only neighbor was the wind. In October of 2022, Elias was scouting locations for a series on forgotten Americana. He was deep in the Olympic Peninsula, a place where the trees grow so thick they seem to swallow the light. After a long day of shooting rusted-out gas stations and moss-covered bridges, he opened his app to find a place for the night. The listing appeared as if by magic. The Pine Solace, $45 a night. There were no interior photos, just a single grainy shot of a small wooden cabin shrouded in mist, surrounded by towering Douglas firs. The description was sparse. For those who wish to be truly alone. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just the pines. The host, a man named Silas, had a profile picture of a darkened hallway and a 5-star rating from only 2 previous guests. Normally, the lack of photos would be a red flag, but Elias was tired. His bones ached from the damp cold, and $45 was a steal. He booked it. The drive into the dark. The GPS instructions took him off the main highway and onto a logging road that hadn't seen gravel in a decade. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, the forest changed. The vibrant green of the ferns turned to a bruised purple, and the shadows of the trees stretched across the road like long, skeletal fingers. By the time he reached the coordinates, his headlights were the only thing keeping the world from dissolving into total blackness. The cabin sat at the end of a dead-end trail. It was older than it looked in the photos. The wood was silver gray and weathered, looking more like a carcass than a house. Elias stepped out of his truck. The air was unnervingly still. No crickets, no owls. Just the sound of his own boots crunching on the dry pine needles. He found the key under a heavy, flat stone near the porch. As he turned the lock, the door didn't just open, it groaned, a slow, heavy sound that felt like a warning. The interior. Elias fumbled for a light switch. When the overhead bulb flickered to life, the Pine Solace revealed itself. It was a single room, a small kitchenette with a rusted sink, a wood-burning stove that hadn't been cleaned in years, and a twin-sized bed tucked into the corner. The smell hit him immediately. It wasn't just the cedar and pine mentioned in the listing. Underneath the scent of wood was something sharp and metallic. It smelled like a penny held in a sweaty palm, the unmistakable scent of old blood. Rustic, Elias muttered to himself, trying to shake the chill. Just rustic. He checked the corners for spiders or mold, his photographer's eye scanning the room. He noticed something odd. The furniture was bolted to the floor. The small wooden table, the single chair, even the bed frame, All of them were secured with heavy steel brackets. Elias walked over to the small window. He tried to look out, but the glass was painted black from the outside. He felt a spike of unease. Why paint the windows in a place designed for viewing the pines? He checked his phone. No service, not even an SOS bar. He was 3 miles from the nearest road, in a cabin with blacked-out windows and bolted furniture. He decided he wouldn't stay the whole night. He'd just rest for a few hours, wait for the moon to rise so he could see the road better, and then drive until he found a Motel 6. He threw his bag on the bed, lay down, and despite the screaming instincts in the back of his mind, exhaustion took over. The witching hour. Elias woke up at exactly 3 a.m. He didn't wake up gradually, he snapped awake, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cabin was pitch black. The overhead light he had left on was now off. Click, click, click. The sound was coming from the nightstand. It was rhythmic, mechanical. Elias reached out, his hand shaking, searching for the bedside lamp. His fingers brushed against the lampshade. He fumbled for the switch and toggled it. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. He reached up inside the shade to see if the bulb had come loose. His fingers didn't find the smooth, rounded glass of a light bulb. Instead, they touched something cold, hard, and square. He pulled out his phone and used the flashlight. The light bulb had been removed. In its place, wired directly into the socket, was a small, high-definition pinhole lens. It wasn't a standard security camera. It was a professional-grade pinhole lens, angled perfectly to capture the face of whoever was lying on the pillow. The click, click, click was the sound of the camera's infrared shutter adjusting to the dark. The sound from below. Elias felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't just being watched, he was being recorded. He scrambled off the bed, his mind racing through possibilities. Was Silas watching him right now? Was there a monitor in another house? He grabbed his bag, ready to sprint for the door, when a new sound froze him in his tracks. Thud. It was heavy, dull. It came from directly beneath his feet. Thud, thud, thud. It was the sound of something or someone moving in a crawl space under the floorboards. But the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't footsteps. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy and wet across the underside of the wood. Elias stared at the floor. In the center of the room, partially hidden by a tattered rug, was a trapdoor. He hadn't noticed it before because of the dim light, but now with his phone's flashlight, the outline was clear. The dragging sound stopped. Then came the whispering. It didn't sound like words. It was a wet, wheezing sound, like someone breathing through a throat full of fluid. The sound rose up through the gaps in the floorboards, surrounding him. "Is he awake yet?" a voice rasped. It wasn't Silas, it was a woman's voice, but it sounded broken, frantic. "He's awake," a man replied, calm, deep, and terrifyingly close. Elias didn't think. He didn't grab his camera gear or his coat. He lunged for the front door. He grabbed the handle and twisted. It wouldn't budge. He remembered the sound of the door groaning when he entered. Now he saw why. A heavy iron bolt had been slid into place from the outside. The trapdoor in the floor began to creak. The wood groaned as something pushed against it from below. Elias looked at the blacked-out window. He took the heavy wooden chair, the only thing not bolted down, and smashed it against the glass with every ounce of strength he had. The glass shattered, revealing not just black paint, but a series of iron bars installed behind the pane. "Help!" he screamed, though he knew no one could hear him. The trap door flipped open. A hand emerged. It was pale, the skin stretched thin over long, dirty fingers. Then came the head of a man, Silas. But he didn't look like a host. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his mouth was pulled back in a permanent, jagged grin. "The pines are so quiet, Elias. Why are you making so much noise?" Elias didn't give him a second chance. He dove toward the smallest window in the kitchenette, a tiny porthole meant for ventilation. He squeezed his frame through, the jagged glass tearing at his shirt and skin. He felt a hand grab his ankle, a grip like a vice. He kicked back blindly, his boot connecting with something soft. The grip loosened just enough. Eli lunged forward, falling out of the cabin and into the freezing mud of the forest floor. He didn't look back. He ran. He ran through the briars and the thorns, his bare feet screaming as they were sliced by rocks and branches. Behind him, he could hear the heavy thudding of boots on the pine needles. Silas wasn't running. He was stalking, a slow, confident pace that suggested he knew the forest better than the prey did. Elias reached his truck. He fumbled for his keys in his pocket. Empty. He had left them on the nightstand. He didn't stop. He kept running down the logging road, his lungs burning, his vision blurring. He ran for miles until the red and blue lights of a state trooper's car appeared in the distance like a miracle. The aftermath. The police arrived at the Pine Solace just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. When they entered the cabin, it was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. The bed, the stove, the bolted-down table, all of it was gone. There was no trapdoor, no camera in the lamp, the windows weren't painted black. The lead officer looked at Elias, who was wrapped in a shock blanket, his feet bandaged and bloody. "Son, are you sure you have the right place? This cabin has been abandoned since the 90s. There's no electricity here, no plumbing." Elias pushed past the officer. "I was here. I broke the window." He pointed to the kitchenette window. It was perfectly intact, covered in a thick layer of dust and spiderwebs that hadn't been disturbed in years. Elias felt his world tilting. Was he losing his mind? Had the exhaustion caused a hallucination? Then he saw it. On the dusty floor, exactly where the bed had been, sat a single square piece of paper, a Polaroid. Elias picked it up. His hands shook so hard the photo nearly fell. It was a picture of him. He was asleep on the twin bed. The photo was taken from a high angle, the exact angle of the light bulb camera. But in the photo, he wasn't alone. Leaning over him, his face inches from Elias's sleeping ear, was Silas. He was holding a pair of long, rusted tailor shears. Elias turned the photo over. On the back, written in fresh black ink that was still slightly tacky to the touch, were 6 words: "You sleep louder than the others." The police never found Silas. They never found the woman's voice from under the floor. And when Elias tried to show them the Airbnb listing on his phone, the app simply said, "Listing not found. Host account deleted." Elias still travels, but he never stays in the woods. And every night before he goes to sleep, he unscrews every light bulb in the room, just to be sure. Mr. Horror Man. Chilling, isn't it? The thought that the very place you paid to keep you safe is actually a hunting ground. Stick around because Story 2 is going to make you rethink every hitchhiker you've ever passed on the road. Story 2, The Hitchhiker on Route 16. There is a stretch of asphalt in British Columbia, Canada, known to the locals as the Highway of Tears. Officially, it's Route 16. It winds through hundreds of miles of wilderness, dense, ancient forests, where the trees stand like silent witnesses to things that should never be spoken of. Since the late 1960s, dozens of people, mostly young women, have vanished along this road. Some say it's the work of a serial killer. Others say the road itself is hungry. In the summer of 2023, Sarah was driving that road alone. She wasn't a local. She was a landscape architect from Vancouver, headed north to Prince George for a contract job. She had heard the stories, of course, but Sarah was a pragmatist. She believed in statistics, not ghost stories. She had a reliable SUV, a full tank of gas, and a podcast to keep her company. She figured as long as she didn't stop for anyone, she was safe. But the highway of tears has a way of breaking even the strongest resolve. The deluge. By 10 p.m., the sky hadn't just turned dark, it had collapsed. A massive cold front had moved in from the coast, bringing a torrential downpour that turned the world into a blur of gray and black. The windshield wipers on Sarah's car were screaming, struggling to clear the sheets of water. The road was narrow, flanked on both sides by trees that seemed to lean inward, suffocating the path. There were no streetlights, there were no other cars. There was only the rhythmic thump of the tires and the oppressive hum of the rain. Then, her headlights caught a flash of color. It was a sharp synthetic yellow, brighter than the surrounding gloom. Sarah slowed down, her heart beginning to hum with a low level of anxiety. As she drew closer, the figure came into focus. It was a woman. She was standing perfectly still on the narrow shoulder, her head bowed against the rain. She wasn't waving for help. She wasn't even looking at the car. She just stood there, getting hammered by the storm. Sarah's first instinct was to keep driving. Rule number 1, never stop. But then she saw how thin the woman was, the way her shoulders shook. She thought about the temperature. It had plummeted to nearly 40 degrees. If she left this woman out here, she would surely die of hypothermia before morning. God damn it, Sarah whispered to herself. She touched the brakes. The SUV slid to a halt about 20 feet past the figure. Sarah looked in the rearview mirror. The woman hadn't moved. She rolled down the passenger window just an inch. "Hey, do you need a lift? You're going to freeze out here," Sarah shouted over the roar of the rain. The woman didn't respond for a long moment. Then, with a slow, mechanical stiffness, she turned her head toward the car. She began to walk. Her gait was heavy, as if her boots were filled with lead. When she reached the door, Sarah unlocked it. The woman climbed into the back seat. The smell of the grave. The moment the door closed, the temperature inside the car seemed to drop 20 degrees. The woman didn't say thank you. She didn't look at Sarah. She just sat in the center of the rear bench, staring straight ahead at the dashboard. "I'm Sarah," Sarah said, her voice sounding thin and shaky. "I'm headed towards Prince George. Is there somewhere I can drop you? A gas station? A town?" The woman didn't speak. She just lifted a pale, trembling hand and pointed forward. Sarah nodded, trying to force a smile she knew the woman couldn't see. "Right, straight ahead. Got it." As Sarah pulled back onto the road, she was hit with a scent that made her stomach turn. It wasn't the smell of a person who had been out in the rain. It was the smell of stagnant pond water, the kind of thick, green sludge you find at the bottom of a swamp. Underneath that was a faint, cloying sweetness, like rotting lilies. Sarah cracked her own window to breathe. She tried to make conversation, mostly to drown out the oppressive silence. "Crazy weather, right? I've never seen it rain this hard. You live around here or just passing through?" The woman remained silent. Sarah glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her hood was still up, casting a deep shadow over her features. All she could see were two thin, blue-tinged lips and a chin that looked as white as bone. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her concern now being overtaken by a primal, lizard-brain fear. "Do you need a hospital?" The woman's head tilted slightly to the left. A wet, squelching sound came from her throat, like air escaping a punctured lung. Sarah turned back to the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She decided she would drop this woman at the very first sign of civilization, a gas station, a rest stop, anything. She just wanted her out of the car. The warning. 20 minutes passed. The GPS showed nothing for another 30 miles. Sarah's eyes kept darting to the mirror. The woman hadn't moved. She didn't blink. She didn't fidget. She sat with a stillness that was utterly unnatural. Suddenly, the interior lights of the car flickered. The radio, which had been playing a low-volume jazz station, erupted into a burst of static. The static grew louder and louder, a piercing shriek that made Sarah's ears bleed. "Hey, what's wrong with the—" "Don't." The voice didn't come from a human throat. It sounded like gravel being ground together in a dark pit. It was loud, vibrating through the very frame of the SUV. Sarah froze. "What?" "Don't look in the mirror." The instruction was so terrifying, so absolute, that Sarah did exactly what she was told not to do. It was an involuntary reflex, the same way you look at a car crash. Her eyes flicked upward to the rearview mirror. In the reflection, the back seat was empty. The yellow raincoat was there, slumped against the seat, but there was no one inside. It was hollow. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, then began to race so fast she felt dizzy. She didn't believe it. She couldn't believe it. She took her eyes off the road for a split second and turned her entire body around to look at the back seat. Empty. The passenger door was still locked. The child's safety locks were engaged. There was no way anyone could have exited the vehicle while it was moving at 60 miles per hour. Sarah slammed on the brakes. The SUV skidded across the slick pavement, the tires screaming as they fought for grip. The car spun 180 degrees before coming to a jarring halt in the middle of the dark highway. Sarah sat there, gasping for air, her forehead resting on the steering wheel. "I'm losing it," she sobbed. "I'm just tired. I'm hallucinating." She reached back to grab the yellow raincoat, wanting to throw out of the car to prove it was real. But when her hand touched the fabric, she recoiled. The coat wasn't just wet from the rain, it was covered in thick black mud. And as she pulled her hand away, she saw 5 wet, muddy finger marks on the back of her own headrest, right where a person's hand would have been if they were leaning forward to whisper in her ear. On the floor mat where the woman's feet had been lay a small object. The locket. Sarah reached down and picked it up. It was a silver heart-shaped locket, rusted and pitted as if it had been submerged in water for decades. The hinge was stuck, but Sarah pried it open with her thumbnail. Inside was a black and white photograph. It was a young girl, maybe 19 years old, with feathered hair and a bright, wide smile. She was wearing a familiar yellow raincoat. Sarah felt a coldness settle in her marrow. She put the car in gear and drove. She didn't stop until she reached a bright 24-hour truck stop 40 miles away. She went inside, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold her coffee. An old trucker, a man with a face like a crumpled map, noticed her state. "You look like you saw a ghost, lady," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. Sarah didn't know what else to do. She took the locket out and pushed it across the table. "I found this on the road. I think I picked someone up." The trucker picked up the locket. His expression went from curious to grim in a heartbeat. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "Route 16? He asked. Sarah nodded. "You're the 3rd one this year," he said, sliding the locket back. "That's Marianne Thorne. She was one of the first. Disappeared in 1974. They found her raincoat in a drainage pipe 3 years later. Never found her." Sarah felt the room spinning. She told me not to look in the mirror." The trucker leaned in, his voice a low whisper. "She tells everyone that. You know why?" Sarah shook her head. Because if you look in the mirror and see her face, you see what she looks like now, after 50 years in the muck. And they say that once you see her, you never really leave the highway. You just wait for the next car to come along. Sarah didn't stay in Prince George. She finished her contract in 3 days and took a flight back to Vancouver, leaving her SUV in a long-term parking lot. She still has the muddy fingerprints on the back of her headrest. No matter how much she scrubs, no matter what chemicals she uses, the mud always comes back. And sometimes, when she's driving at night in the city, she feels a drop of cold, stagnant water fall from the ceiling of her car onto her shoulder. She never looks in the mirror. Mr. Horrorman, some things on the road are meant to stay lost, but Marianne? She's still waiting for a ride. If you're still with me, get ready for story 3. This one isn't about what's on the road, it's about what's waiting inside your hotel room. Stay tuned. Story 3. The Room Under the Bed. There's a specific kind of loneliness that only exists in the American West. It's the kind found on the long stretches of Nevada highway where the horizon is a flat, jagged line and the gas stations are 100 miles apart. To the casual traveler, it's a scenic void. But to someone like Marcus, a traveling medical equipment salesman who lived out of his sedan, it was simply a Tuesday. Marcus was 34, cynical, and perpetually exhausted. He had a territory that covered 3 states, and he knew every budget motel from Reno to Las Vegas. He had stayed in places with peeling wallpaper, places with questionable stains, and places where the locks were more of a suggestion than a security measure. He thought he had seen the worst of the hospitality industry. He was wrong. The Starlight Motor Lodge. It was nearly midnight when Marcus pulled into the gravel lot of the Starlight Motor Lodge. The neon sign was missing the S and the L, so it simply buzzed a sickly pink Starlight Motor Lodge. The air was dry and smelled of dust and sagebrush. Marcus walked into the small, cramped office. Behind the plexiglass sat a man whose skin looked like crumpled parchment. He didn't look up from his newspaper as Marcus approached. "Room for 1. Marcus said, laying his credit card on the counter. "Room 212, the clerk rasped. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't offer a receipt. He simply slid a heavy brass key across the laminate. "No refunds after the door's locked." Marcus took the key, too tired to argue about the price or the clerk's lack of manners. He drove his car around to the second-floor balcony, hauled his suitcase up the stairs, and entered room 212. The odor. The moment Marcus stepped inside, he stopped. He didn't even drop his bags. The room was freezing. The wall unit AC was blasting a jet of recycled metallic air. But underneath the chill, there was a smell. It was thick, cloying. It was the scent of a floral air freshener trying and failing to mask the smell of a dumpster in July. It was sweet, sickly, and made the back of his throat itch. "Great," Marcus muttered, "probably a burst pipe." He went to the bathroom to check the drains, but they were dry. He checked the trash can. It was empty. He even checked the mini fridge, expecting to find a rotting sandwich left by a previous guest, but it was pristine. He opened the window to let in the desert air, but the smell seemed to cling to the carpet, rising up like an invisible mist. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a bottle of expensive cologne and sprayed it liberally around the room. The mixture of midnight forest and the underlying rot made him gag, but it was better than the alternative. He was too tired to go back to the office and fight for another room. He stripped down to his undershirt, turned off the flickering overhead light, and climbed into the bed. The shifting weight. Sleep didn't come easily. The mattress was soft, too soft. It felt lumpy, as if the springs were unevenly distributed. Every time Marcus moved, the bed made a strange, wet squelch sound, rather than the typical metallic groan of a budget mattress. He lay there for an hour, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows of passing trucks dance across the popcorn texture of the plaster. Around 2 a.m., he felt it. It was subtle at first, a slight dip in the mattress near his feet.
He froze, thinking maybe the bed frame had settled, but then it happened again. This time, it was a slow, deliberate shift of weight, as if someone or something was tossing and turning directly beneath him. Marcus sat up and clicked on the bedside lamp. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the AC. "Get a grip," he whispered to himself. He leaned over the side of the bed and looked underneath. The space was mostly obscured by a dust ruffle, but his phone's flashlight revealed nothing but a few dust bunnies and a discarded candy wrapper. The bed sat on a solid box spring frame that reached nearly to the floor. He lay back down, chalking it up to his overactive imagination and the caffeine he chugged at the last gas station. He finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. But his dreams were filled with images of dark water and things crawling through the desert sand. 4 a.m., the breaking point. Marcus woke up gasping. The smell had returned, but now it was 10 times stronger. It wasn't just in the room anymore. It was in his nose, in his clothes, in his very pores. It was the absolute smell of decay. And then he felt the movement again. This time, it wasn't a shift, it was a thump. A heavy, rhythmic thudding against the mattress right beneath his ribcage. Thump, thump, thump. It felt like a heartbeat, a giant, wet heartbeat. Marcus bolted out of bed, his heart hammering in his chest. He stood in the middle of the room, panting. He grabbed his heavy leather work boot and slammed it down on the center of the bed. Instead of a solid bounce, the mattress gave way with a sickening crunch. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated fear fueled by rage. He grabbed the corner of the heavy mattress and hauled it backward, throwing it on the floor. He stared at the box spring. It looked normal at first, but then he noticed the fabric on the top of the box spring, the white mesh that sits under the mattress, had been neatly slit open with a razor, forming a large rectangular flap. The flap was moving. Marcus grabbed the edge of the box spring and flipped it over. He didn't find a dead animal. He didn't find a burst pipe. He found a man. The box spring had been meticulously hollowed out. The wooden sluts had been reinforced with duct tape and wire to create a small, rectangular coffin-like space. Inside that space was a human being. He was skeletal, his skin the color of a mushroom grown in the dark. He wore no clothes, Marcus only a tattered pair of gray rags.
Who are
you? His hair
you?
was long, matted
What the
with
hell
sweat
is
and
this?
filth. And the man didn't jump out. He didn't attack. Were milky white with
uncurled his body, his joints popping like dry twigs. In his right hand, he clutched a jagged shard of a broken mirror. Around him, inside the hollowed box spring, was a collection of items. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized them. There was his own silver watch, which he thought he'd misplaced on the nightstand. There were his spare car keys. There was his wallet, emptied of cash, the credit cards arranged in a neat circle. And in the center of the man's nest was a small, neat pile of hair. Brown, short hair. Marcus reached up and touched the back of his own head. He felt a jagged, uneven patch where his hair had been shorn off while he slept. The man in the bed looked at Marcus. He didn't seem to see him with his eyes, but he tilted his head, tracking Marcus's heavy breathing. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face, revealing rotted, blackened teeth. "You're the first one who stayed the whole night," the man whispered. His voice was a dry rattle, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. They usually leave when they smell the rot, but you stayed. The man reached out a trembling hand, clutching the shard of glass. "Do I get to keep you now?" The flight. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't grab his bag. He didn't grab his shoes. He sprinted for the door, tore it open, and flew down the stairs. He reached the front office and began screaming, pounding on the plexiglass. The clerk from earlier was still there, sitting in the same chair, reading the same newspaper. He didn't look up. "There's a man in my room, under the bed! Call the police!" Marcus shrieked. The clerk slowly lowered his paper. He looked at Marcus with an expression of profound boredom. "Room 212?" the clerk asked. "Yes, room 212. He's in the bed." The clerk sighed and reached for a logbook. "I told him he needed to be more quiet. Third complaint this month." Marcus froze. You knew? You knew he was in there?" The clerk finally looked Marcus in the eye. "He pays his rent in what he finds. I don't ask questions. Now, do you want a different room or are you leaving?" The aftermath. Marcus drove 3 hours in his socks until he found a police station in a larger town. When the authorities raided the Starlight Motor Lodge the following morning, the clerk was gone. Room 212 was empty. The box spring was there, but the nest had been cleared out. All they found was a single bloody shard of a broken mirror and Marcus's silver watch left dead center on the floorboards. The police investigation revealed that the dweller, as the local papers began to call him, had likely been living in the motel's infrastructure for years. He hadn't just been in room 212. He had created a network of tunnels through the crawl spaces in the walls, hollowing out furniture in various rooms to watch, steal from, and in some cases, touch the guests as they slept. They found several other hollowed-out box springs in the storage shed behind the motel. Some of them contained old clothes, bone fragments, and hundreds of Polaroids of sleeping strangers. Marcus never went back to Nevada. He took a desk job in an office building with bright lights and wide-open spaces. He sold his car. He moved into an apartment on the 20th floor. But to this day, Marcus cannot sleep on a bed with a box spring. He sleeps on a thin Japanese-style futon laid directly on the hardwood floor. Because every time he lies down, he remembers the wet squelch of the mattress. He remembers the rhythmic thud against his ribs. And most of all, he remembers the feeling of a stranger's hand reaching out in the dark, wondering if it was finally time to keep him. Mr. Horror Man. The next time you check into a motel and the price seems a little too good to be true, do yourself a favor. Check under the bed. Better yet, check inside it. You never know who's been waiting for a guest just like you. I'm Mr. Horror Man. If these stories kept you up tonight, leave a comment with the word insomnia so I know who made it to the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to join our circle of shadows. Until next time, keep the lights on. You're going to need them. Narrator. They say the road is a lonely place, but after tonight, you might wish you were actually alone. If you enjoyed these tales, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Horror Man. Join our community of the macabre and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a descent into darkness. Until next time, keep your doors locked and never look under the bed. Sleep well if you can. In this video, do you have a scary travel story? Share it in the comments. I might feature it in the next video.